The first scream ripped through the luxury suite just after sunrise. It wasn't the cry of a man startled awake by a nightmare. It was the guttural, animal sound of someone who suddenly realized his body was betraying him. Richard Calloway stumbled out of the bed, silk sheets twisted around his legs, and collapsed onto the hotel room floor. For a few moments, he didn't understand what he was seeing. The carpet beneath him was speckled with pale, curling flakes. At first, he thought it was dust or maybe residue from champagne glasses tipped over the night before. But then he reached up and touched his cheek. A strip of skin came away in his hand. The mirror in the bathroom was merciless. The face staring back at him wasn't his anymore. His once tanned, polished skin was peeling in sheets, raw red patches glistening underneath. His lips looked swollen, cracked, as if he had spent hours under a blowtorch. He tried to wipe the sweat from his forehead, but what smeared across the glass wasn't just sweat. It was pieces of himself. His chest burned as if someone had poured acid on him in his sleep. His hands shook violently, nails scraping against skin that peeled like wet paint. Richard staggered back into the bedroom, vision blurred by tears and panic. His million-dollar deal waiting at the conference later that morning, his picture-perfect image as a sharp, unbreakable businessman, all of it collapsed in an instant under the weight of one horrific truth. His body was falling apart. He grabbed the phone on the nightstand, his fingers slipping against the receiver slick with blood and tissue. The words barely made it past his shredded throat. "Help me, my skin, it's coming off." The operator on the other end asked him to slow down, to stay calm, but his voice broke into hoarse sobs. He dropped the phone, collapsing to his knees. The suite smelled different now, too. Not like perfume or spilled wine from the night before, but metallic, rotten, like flesh left too long in the sun. Richard's mind flashed back to her, the woman he had pulled into his arms just hours ago, her perfume clinging to his sheets, her body pressed against his. She had left in the early hours, slipping out before dawn, and he hadn't thought twice about it. Now he couldn't stop thinking, what did she do to me? Paramedics burst through the door minutes later, stunned by the sight. One of them gagged, the other barked orders, but both struggled to touch him without flinching. They wrapped him in gauze, his flesh sticking to the fabric, tearing more as they tried to lift him onto the stretcher. His screams echoed down the hallway of the five-star hotel, guests peeking through cracked doors, whispering, horrified. The cameras caught flashes of bloodied sheets and clumps of human skin scattered across the carpet like confetti from hell. By the time they wheeled him into the emergency room, Richard Calloway wasn't just another wealthy businessman. They were calling him the man who melted overnight. Doctors huddled around him, baffled. No burns, no chemical spills, no history of rare skin disorders. Yet here he was, skin sloughing off as if his body had been dipped in acid. And underneath it all lingered the unspoken question that made even the most seasoned nurse shiver. What exactly had happened in that hotel room the night before? And who was the mysterious woman that vanished just before dawn? Richard Calloway had always been the kind of man people either admired or despised. Rarely anything in between. At 42, he had the kind of confidence that came from knowing he had built an empire with his own hands. From the glossy covers of real estate magazines to the whispers at country club bars, his name carried weight. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the permanent tan of someone who spent his weekends golfing instead of resting. His suits were tailored, his watches imported, and his smile rehearsed in boardrooms where millions change hands. On the surface, he was the American success story, self-made, relentless, and untouchable. But the truth, like his life that morning, was already peeling away. Behind the polished image, Richard's personal life was a mess. His marriage to Evelyn, the refined wife he paraded at charity galas, had soured years ago. They still shared a house, but not a bed. Their 2 children were tucked away in private schools, and Richard used his business trips as excuses to indulge in pleasures that his suburban mansion no longer provided. The press never caught on because Richard was careful, meticulous. He didn't chase cheap scandals. He chose his companions like he chose his wine, expensive, rare, and exotic. That was how he found her. It was late on a Thursday night when Richard walked into the Indigo Room, an upscale bar tucked away inside a luxury hotel on the coast. He wasn't looking for company. At least that's what he told himself. But he noticed her the moment he stepped in. She sat alone at the far end, a glass of something crimson in her hand, the dim lighting painting shadows across her face. She was young, not too young to be obvious, but young enough that her presence made him feel alive again. Her dress was a shade of deep scarlet, clinging to her frame like it had been made for her, and when she lifted her eyes, he caught something that stopped him cold. They were beautiful, yes, but there was weight behind them. Pain. Mystery. She called herself Dahlia. Just Dahlia. No last name, no backstory, at least not one she was willing to share. She spoke with a voice that was smooth and deliberate, like she had rehearsed every word. When Richard asked what she did for a living, she smiled faintly and said, "I do what I need to survive." It wasn't the answer he expected, but it intrigued him. He was used to women laughing too hard at his jokes, pretending to be impressed by his wealth. Dahlia wasn't impressed. If anything, she seemed amused by his attempt to peel back her layers. As the night stretched on, Richard found himself confessing more than he usually did. He told her about the deal that had brought him into town, a multi-million-dollar contract that would cement his reputation. He bragged about his properties, his cars, his investments. She listened, nodding politely, but her eyes seemed to drift past his words, as if she was studying him in ways he couldn't see. Still, when her hand brushed against his on the bar top, he felt a spark that he hadn't felt in years. They left together around midnight, slipping into the anonymity of the hotel elevator. He remembered the way her perfume filled the small space, floral but sharp, intoxicating. He remembered the way she pressed her body against his as if daring him to lose control. And he did. Richard thought he knew women. He thought he knew desire. But Dahlia was different. She didn't just take part. She orchestrated everything, guiding his movements, demanding intensity he wasn't sure he could give. At times it felt less like lovemaking and more like a ritual, her whispers in his ear half pleas, half incantations. When he drifted in and out of exhaustion, she urged him on, eyes burning with a hunger he couldn't name. By the time dawn light filtered through the curtains, Richard was too spent to notice when she slipped away. Lying in that bed, he felt the dull ache of satisfaction, the smugness of a man who still believed he was in control. But the truth was that Dahlia hadn't been conquered. She had chosen him. Out of all the men in that bar, out of all the faceless strangers who might have offered her a drink, she had set her eyes on him. And Richard Calloway, with all his wealth and arrogance, had no idea that he had just stepped into a trap that would cost him more than any business deal ever could. To his colleagues and rivals, Richard was a shark. To his family, he was a distant husband, a provider more than a partner. To Dahlia, though, he was something else entirely. He was a target, a vessel, maybe even a victim. And as the ambulance sirens wailed that morning, carrying his broken body away, no one, not the paramedics, not the hotel staff, not even Richard himself, could yet imagine that the beautiful stranger in the red dress was more than just a fleeting mistake. She was a storm cloaked in silk, and his life had just been claimed by it. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, and Richard felt the air change. The Indigo Room's muted chatter was gone, replaced by the heavy silence of a private world suspended between floors. Dahlia leaned against the mirror, her crimson dress catching the low glow of the elevator light. Her eyes never left him, and for the first time that evening, Richard felt like the one being studied. He prided himself on being the predator in situations like this. Wealthy, charming, decisive. But Dahlia's gaze stripped away that illusion. It wasn't lust in her eyes. It was hunger. When the doors opened, she didn't wait for him to lead. She took his hand firmly and pulled him into the long carpeted hallway. Her steps were purposeful, almost rehearsed, as if she had been here before. By the time they reached his suite, Richard's pulse was thundering in his ears, not from alcohol or desire, but from something he couldn't quite name. Still, he laughed it off, swiped his key card, and let her in. Inside, the room was a shrine to luxury, crystal glasses on the minibar, white linen spread across a king-sized bed, city lights glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Dahlia slipped off her heels by the door and padded silently across the carpet. Her movements were smooth, feline, too precise to be casual. Richard poured them drinks, trying to steady himself. She raised her glass, but her eyes stayed locked on him, and when she finally sipped, she left a smear of red lipstick on the rim like a warning. The first touch was electric. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw down the side of his neck, pressing just hard enough to make him swallow. She whispered something he didn't understand, a language foreign to his ears, rhythmic almost like a chant. Richard didn't ask her to repeat it. He was too wrapped up in the way her lips brushed his ear, the way her nails raked his back when he pulled her close. What followed was nothing like the polished tryst Richard was used to. There was no performance, no polite pretense. Dahlia was relentless. Every time he thought the night had peaked, she pulled him deeper, her body demanding more, her whispers urging him to keep going long past exhaustion. She wanted the lights dim, not off. She wanted him to watch her, to see her, as if his gaze alone fed something inside her. Hours blurred. The sheets twisted and tore. His chest ached, muscles screaming, but Dahlia showed no sign of slowing. At times, Richard swore he saw something flicker across her face, an expression that didn't belong in passion, but in ritual. Her eyes would roll back slightly when he touched her, her lips moving silently as though in prayer. Once when his hand brushed her wrist, he felt her pulse hammering in a rhythm too fast, too violent for any normal human. He pulled back, startled, but she pressed her mouth to his before he could say a word. By 3 a.m, Richard was drenched in sweat, trembling from exertion. His body felt strange, too hot, too weak, like he was feverish. He chalked it up to fatigue, to the endless rounds she demanded of him. Still, in the back of his mind, unease began to gnaw. Dahlia didn't look tired at all. She looked radiant, glowing, as if every drop of his strength was transferring into her. Sometime near dawn, Richard collapsed onto the bed, gasping for breath. He half expected her to curl against him, to drift off in the afterglow. Instead, she stood at the edge of the bed, pulling her dress back over her body with slow, deliberate movements. She didn't say thank you, didn't kiss him goodnight. She leaned down, brushed a strand of damp hair from his forehead, and whispered, "You were chosen." Before he could ask what she meant, the door clicked shut behind her. Richard lay there in the silence, too drained to follow. His eyelids sagged, his body humming with a strange mixture of pleasure and unease. He drifted in and out of a restless sleep, haunted by fragments of her voice, those words looping in his head. You were chosen. The sun was rising when he stirred again. His mouth tasted metallic like copper. His skin itched furiously, so much that he scratched absent-mindedly at his chest. His nails came away with something pale beneath them, flaky dry. At first, he thought it was sweat crystallizing. He turned his hand over. What clung to his fingers wasn't sweat. It was skin. His skin. He sat up sharply, heart slamming against his ribs. Sheets clung damply to his body, and when he pulled them away, thin curls of skin came with them, floating down onto the carpet. The itch turned into fire. His arms were blotched with angry red patches, his chest raw where the skin had peeled away. He stumbled toward the mirror, every step leaving faint streaks of tissue behind him. The reflection that stared back was unrecognizable. His face was mottled, patches of flesh lifting like old wallpaper. His lips were cracked, leaking blood. His eyes, wide and terrified, searched for logic, but there was none. The businessman who once thought himself untouchable was gone. What remained was something closer to a corpse in the making. And in that moment, before the panic fully consumed him, Richard realized the truth. Whatever Dahlia had brought in his bed that night wasn't just desire. It was a curse, a poison, a deliberate act. She hadn't come to him by chance. She had marked him, and by morning, his body was already unraveling. The first light of morning should have felt like salvation, the promise of a new day. But for Richard Calloway, it was nothing short of damnation. The sunlight spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows seemed harsher than usual, merciless in its clarity. Every detail of the suite was exposed. The empty champagne bottle tipped over on the counter, the red dress left draped on a chair like a taunt, and the bed that now looked like a battlefield. Richard pushed himself upright, but the movement tore something inside him. A sharp sting shot through his chest, and when he looked down, he saw it. Patches of his skin lifting, curling, falling away in delicate strips that landed on the sheets like grotesque confetti. Panic gripped him. His hands shook violently as he touched his face, and his fingertips came back slick with blood and fragments of flesh. His jawline, once sharp and commanding, was now a canvas of angry red lesions. He stumbled toward the bathroom, half blind from the tears burning in his eyes. The man in the mirror wasn't Richard Calloway anymore. He looked like something clawed out of a fire. His skin bubbled and flaked, lips split open like parchment. He screamed, a sound so raw, so primal that it rattled the glass shelves. He tried splashing water on his face, desperate to wash it away. But the cold sting only made the burning worse. More skin slid off, floating in the sink, clogging the drain. His body reeked of copper and rot, a smell that turned his stomach until he retched violently over the porcelain. His vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges. He clawed at the counter for balance, but every surface he touched left behind a smear of blood and tissue. Somewhere in the haze of agony, Richard's survival instincts kicked in. He staggered back into the bedroom, reaching for the hotel phone with trembling fingers. The receiver slipped in his grip twice before he finally pressed it to his ear. His voice came out hoarse, shredded. "Help me. Please. My skin, it's coming off. Oh God, help me." The operator's calm voice only fueled his terror. "Sir, I need you to slow down. Tell me your location. I'm at the Indigo Hotel, Suite 1407. My skin is..." His voice broke into a ragged sob. He dropped the phone, collapsing to the floor, writhing in agony as another wave of flesh tore away from his arms. By the time the paramedics arrived, the suite was a horror show. Bloodied sheets tangled on the bed, clumps of human skin scattered across the carpet, and Richard crouched near the window, wrapped in nothing but pain. The medics hesitated for a split second when they saw him. One gagged, hand flying to his mask, while the other barked out instructions, forcing composure. They moved quickly, pulling gauze and saline, but every attempt to bandage him seemed to rip more flesh away. His screams echoed down the pristine hallway of the luxury hotel, freezing guests who peeked from cracked doors. Some thought it was a crime scene. Others whispered about chemical burns, about a man melting alive. When they strapped him onto the stretcher, Richard thrashed violently, begging them not to touch him, because every touch felt like fire. His body stuck to the gauze, tearing more skin as they lifted him. The elevator ride down was filled with his howls, the sound bouncing off mirrored walls, leaving the medics pale and shaken. Outside, the morning sun glinted cruelly against the ambulance doors. Tourists gathering for breakfast stared in shock as the once polished businessman was wheeled out, barely recognizable. His once commanding presence was reduced to a figure wrapped in bloody bandages, trembling and broken. Someone pulled out a phone, recording the scene, and by the time the ambulance pulled away, hashtags were already spreading online. Hashtag Melting Man. Hashtag Indigo Hotel Mystery. At St. Augustine Medical Center, doctors and nurses rushed him into an isolation room. They whispered urgently, confused by what they were seeing. No signs of burns, no exposure to known chemicals, no documented disease that could strip skin this fast. His vitals were unstable, his body temperature spiking dangerously, but his organs seemed intact. It was as if his flesh alone had declared war against him. Richard begged them to stop the pain, his words slurring as his lips split further. "It's her," he rasped. "The woman. She did this to me." But when pressed for details, he couldn't describe more than her name. Dahlia. Just Dahlia. As the medical team scrambled to stabilize him, word began to leak beyond the hospital walls. Hotel staff whispered to reporters about the strange woman who had checked in with him and vanished before dawn. The police were called. Detective Claire Halloway stood outside the ER doors, notebook in hand, already piecing together that this wasn't just a medical anomaly. It was the beginning of something darker. In the sterile hum of the hospital, Richard's cries echoed long after the doors swung shut. To the doctors, he was a mystery. To the paramedics, a nightmare. But to Dahlia, wherever she had gone, Richard Calloway was exactly what she intended him to be. Chosen, marked, and ruined. Detective Claire Halloway had seen her share of strange cases in her 20 years with the department, but nothing prepared her for the scene that greeted her at St. Augustine Medical Center. Nurses whispered in the hallways. Interns lingered at the glass windows of the isolation room. And even the seasoned ER staff couldn't hide the horror on their faces. Through the window, Claire saw Richard Calloway strapped to a hospital bed, wrapped in layers of gauze that were already soaked through with blood and fluid. His body convulsed in waves of agony, the monitors screeching as doctors scrambled to keep him stable. She had worked homicide long enough to know the look of a dying man. This one wasn't going to make it. The first reports from paramedics had sounded surreal. Patient appears to be shedding skin at an alarming rate. Unknown cause. Possible chemical exposure. Claire didn't buy it. There was no fire, no acid spill, no industrial accident. This wasn't random. This had intent written all over it. She began at the Indigo Hotel, the last known site of Richard's normal life. The suite had already been cordoned off with yellow tape, but the crime scene techs were moving carefully, hesitant as if the room itself might be contagious. Claire pulled on gloves and stepped inside. The stench hit first. Coppery blood mixed with something foul, almost sweet like rotting fruit. The carpet was littered with curled flakes of skin, enough to fill a shoebox. The bed was drenched, not with the expected traces of sex and sweat, but with something stranger, dark stains, half-dried, sticky to the touch. "Looks like he was butchered in here," one of the techs muttered. "No," Claire corrected, her eyes sweeping across the room. "This wasn't a butcher job. This was biology." On the nightstand, she found an empty glass with lipstick still clinging to the rim, red, bold, deliberate. Beside it was a half-empty bottle of champagne and 2 used condoms, both sealed inside evidence bags by the team. What caught her attention, though, was the faint residue inside one of them. A clear gel-like substance that didn't look like anything she'd seen before. She instructed the techs to rush it to the lab. The hotel manager was less than helpful, his face pale with fear at the thought of his luxury establishment tied to something like this. "We've already spoken to our lawyers," he stammered. "This cannot get out." "You understand? Our guests, our reputation." Claire cut him off coldly. "What I understand is that a man nearly melted to death in your hotel. So unless you want me to drag you downtown for obstruction, you're going to give me everything. Guest logs, surveillance footage, all of it." Reluctantly, he complied. The security footage showed Richard entering the hotel at 11:47 p.m. with a woman in a crimson dress at his side. Her face was partially obscured by the camera angle, but her posture was unmistakable, confident, fluid, like she owned the ground she walked on. At 4:12 a.m., she left alone. She didn't run. She didn't sneak. She walked out as if she knew no one would dare stop her. Then came the kicker. At 4:15, the camera feed glitched. 3 minutes of static. By the time the footage resumed, the lobby was empty. Someone had tampered with the system. Someone who knew what they were doing. Claire leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against the desk as the pieces began to form. This wasn't random. Richard hadn't just picked up the wrong woman. This was deliberate. At the hospital, the medical examiner gave her the first breakthrough. "We found something unusual," he explained, showing her slides under a microscope. "The patient's epidermis isn't just sloughing off, it's being dissolved. There's evidence of an enzyme breaking down the proteins in his skin. It's similar to necrotizing fasciitis, but much faster and localized. Almost like a biological weapon." "Are you saying someone infected him?" Claire asked. The examiner hesitated. "Not infected. More like transferred. Whatever it is, it was introduced through direct contact. Sexual contact, most likely." The implications made Claire's stomach churn. A woman weaponizing intimacy, turning sex into a death sentence. When she pressed further, lab results confirmed the substance found in the condom was laced with a protein compound not cataloged in any medical database. Highly corrosive to human tissue, yet stable enough to survive in body fluids. It wasn't something you could buy off the street. It had to be engineered. Claire dug deeper into the mystery woman. Witnesses at the Indigo Room bar recalled her ordering a rare cocktail with pomegranate syrup. One bartender described her as mesmerizing, though he couldn't remember her name. Another swore she left him with a $100 tip and a smile that made him forget his own. To them, she was a ghost in silk. But Claire's instincts told her otherwise. She started combing through similar cases, strange hospitalizations, unexplained deaths among wealthy men in other cities. It didn't take long to find them. A hedge fund manager in Chicago whose skin blistered off overnight. A plastic surgeon in Miami who collapsed in a hotel lobby, body riddled with lesions. A shipping magnate in New Orleans, found dead in his penthouse, sheets soaked in blood and flesh. Each case was chalked up to bizarre infections, allergic reactions, freak accidents. But the timelines, the details, the whispers from witnesses, they all painted the same picture. A woman. Always a woman. Always young, beautiful, and gone by dawn. Claire gave her a name to work with, at least until the real one surfaced. Dahlia. It was what Calloway had rasped out in the hospital before his body began to shut down completely. Just one name, but it was enough. Back in her office, the evidence spread across her desk like a puzzle with missing pieces. Surveillance stills, medical reports, a growing list of dead men who all had the same profile, wealthy, powerful, accustomed to getting what they wanted. Men like Richard Calloway, who thought money could buy them anything, even immunity from consequences. But Dahlia wasn't selling pleasure. She was selling death. Claire stared at the red lipstick-stained glass collected from the hotel suite. She felt a chill crawl down her spine. Whoever this woman was, she wasn't just a killer. She was deliberate, precise, methodical. And the way she moved through cities, leaving corpses in her wake, told Claire one thing: Dahlia wasn't finished. And unless they stopped her, more men would die, melting from the inside out, punished in the most intimate way imaginable. Long before she was Dahlia, the phantom in the red dress whispered about in hushed tones across cities. She was a girl named Mariah Lewis. Born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, she never had a chance at the kind of safety other children took for granted. Her father, a truck driver with a drinking problem, was rarely home. When he was, his temper swung like a pendulum. Unpredictable, violent, devastating. Her mother disappeared before Mariah turned 10, leaving behind nothing but cigarette burns on the kitchen table and the faint memory of a woman who once hummed gospel songs while folding laundry. Mariah grew up hungry, not just for food, but for stability, for kindness, for control. The foster home she cycled through offered none of those things. Instead, she learned quickly how to adapt, how to survive. When she was 13, she was placed in the home of a man who called himself a disciplinarian. What he really was, though, was a predator. For months, Mariah endured what no child should, her body and spirit fractured in ways that would never fully heal. She ran away at 14, disappearing into the underbelly of the city, a runaway nobody came looking for. For years, she scraped by with whatever she could find, cleaning motel rooms, waiting tables, stripping under neon lights that made her skin glow while men tossed crumpled bills at her feet. She learned the mechanics of seduction, the power of her body, the hunger in men's eyes. But she also learned their cruelty. Time and again, she became a plaything for men with too much money and too little conscience. It was in one of those clubs that she met Dr. Dominic Ward, a biomedical researcher who liked to troll the edges of society for broken things he could remake. He was charming, polished, and to Mariah, he looked like salvation. He told her she was special, that he could help her reinvent herself, give her a life where no man could ever use her again. At 16, desperate and naive, she believed him. Ward brought her into his world. Not the world of glossy labs and university grants, but the secret one he ran on the side. A private research facility hidden in the outskirts of Houston, funded by investors who didn't care about ethics, only results. The experiments were meant to create biological solutions to warfare, proteins that could dissolve human tissue, enzymes that could break down enemy soldiers from the inside out without a single bullet fired. Mariah became his favorite subject. He called her the vessel. The trials were brutal. Injections that burned like liquid fire, nights spent vomiting blood, days when her skin blistered under ultraviolet lamps. Other girls brought into the program died within weeks. Mariah endured. Somehow, her body adapted. The enzymes fused with her system, threading through her blood, her sweat, her saliva. Her DNA rewrote itself to accommodate the toxin. When the scientists tested her, they discovered that her fluids could corrode flesh like acid, but without harming her. She was immune. Ward was ecstatic. "You're a miracle," he told her. But what he meant was, "You're my weapon." By 18, Mariah understood the truth. She wasn't a miracle. She was a prisoner. Ward used her like a lab rat, pushing her body further, cataloging every man she touched, every kiss that left a rash, every accidental brush of skin that left welts. When she begged him to stop, he reminded her that she had nowhere else to go, no one who cared, no name that mattered. But Mariah was patient. Survival had always been her gift. She waited. She watched. And on the night the facility lost power during a summer storm, she made her move. Ward lay sleeping in his office, his head on a desk cluttered with files. She leaned over him, pressed her lips to his neck, and whispered, "Now you know what it feels like." By the time the backup generators hummed to life, Ward's skin was already peeling away in strips. Mariah set fire to the lab before she fled. The flames consumed years of research, cages of animals twisted by experiments, and the bodies of girls who never survived long enough to escape. She walked away barefoot into the night, the rain washing the soot and blood from her skin. From that moment forward, Mariah Lewis ceased to exist. She became Dahlia, a new name, a new life. But Dahlia wasn't free. She carried the curse of what they had done to her inside her own body. Every lover she touched risked destruction. Every kiss, every embrace was laced with danger. At first, she tried to live cautiously, working under aliases, staying alone. But loneliness gnawed at her, and so did rage. The world had used her, chewed her up, spat her out. Men had taken everything from her childhood, her body, her choice. So she decided to take something back. Dahlia didn't hunt indiscriminately. She chose her targets with care. Men like Richard Calloway. Men who thought women were toys to be bought, played with, discarded. Men who carried themselves with the arrogance of untouchable wealth. To them, she offered a night of unforgettable passion. To her, it was justice served in the most intimate way possible. In Miami, she whispered to a plastic surgeon who bragged about the whys he sedated on his operating table. In Chicago, she traced her nails down the chest of a hedge fund manager who laughed about ruining families with his deals. In New Orleans, she danced with a shipping magnate who had a history of broken promises and broken women. By dawn, they were all gone. Bodies collapsing under the weight of a toxin they couldn't fight, their wealth and power useless against her curse. With every city, her legend grew. Bartenders remembered the scarlet dress. Hotel clerks remembered the scent of her perfume lingering in the hallways. But no one ever remembered her leaving. She was smoke, slipping away before the fire spread. Detective Claire Halloway didn't know all of this yet, but the pattern was clear. Dahlia wasn't just a killer. She was the product of something darker, an experiment that never should have existed. And as much as Claire hated to admit it, part of her understood Dahlia's rage. For Dahlia, sex was no longer intimacy. It was retribution. It was survival. It was the only power she had left. And somewhere out there, beyond the reach of the law, Dahlia was still moving, still choosing, still deciding who deserved to pay the price written into her very blood. Detective Claire Halloway didn't believe in ghosts, but Dahlia was starting to feel like one. Every time Claire got close, she slipped away, leaving behind only bodies and whispers. Chicago, Miami, New Orleans, now St. Augustine. Each city told the same story. A wealthy man found in a hotel room, his body unraveling in ways that defied medicine. Each time, the same description surfaced. A woman in a red dress, eyes that lingered too long, a perfume that clung to the air long after she was gone. Claire had built a career on following trails others missed, but Dahlia's path wasn't just elusive, it was deliberate. There were no credit cards, no plane tickets, no digital footprints. Yet there were patterns. Dahlia wasn't killing at random. She chose men with reputations, powerful, arrogant men who believed they were untouchable. Claire dug through lawsuits, gossip columns, private settlements. Every victim had skeletons rattling in their closets. Dahlia was choosing them like a jury foreman with a vendetta. The break came in Savannah. A tip from informant led Claire to a boutique hotel on River Street, a place where old-world charm met Southern decadence. The staff remembered a woman checking in under the name Anna Rose. The description matched Dahlia. She had been seen in the lounge, sipping wine, speaking to a local developer known for his shady land grabs. He never made it home. His body was found in his car the next morning, skin blistered and peeling. But this time, Dahlia slipped up. Surveillance cameras caught her silhouette leaving the hotel at dawn. The footage wasn't clear, but Claire recognized the tilt of her head, the deliberate stride. For the first time, Dahlia wasn't just a rumor. She was real. Claire tracked her to a coastal town 2 hours south. Dahlia had rented a room at a faded motel, paid in cash, under yet another false name. Claire parked her unmarked car across the street and waited. Hours bled into night. Neon lights from the sign flickered across the cracked blinds of room 12. At midnight, the door opened. Dahlia stepped out, draped in that signature crimson dress, though the motel's harsh yellow lights made it look darker, almost brown. She moved with the same unhurried grace Claire had studied in the tapes. For a moment, Claire felt something unexpected, sympathy. Dahlia wasn't a monster in appearance. She was stunning, magnetic, almost fragile in her solitude. But Claire reminded herself of the bodies, of Richard Calloway gasping in the ER, skin sloughing off as he rasped Dahlia's name. Sympathy couldn't save anyone. Claire approached slowly, hand hovering near her weapon. "Dahlia," she called out, her voice steady. The woman froze. She turned, and for the first time, Claire saw her face up close. Younger than she expected, but her eyes were ancient, carrying the weight of every scar life had carved into her. Dahlia smiled faintly, as though the sound of her own name spoken aloud didn't startle her at all. "You've been looking for me," Dahlia said softly, her voice carrying an edge of amusement. "I'm not the only one," Claire replied. "There are families who want answers. Men who died screaming." Dahlia tilted her head. "Men who deserved it." Claire felt the tension coil in her chest. "That's not your call to make, isn't it?" Dahlia stepped closer, and Claire caught the faint scent of her perfume, sharp, intoxicating, like crushed pomegranates and smoke. "Every man I touched took something that didn't belong to him. Their greed, their cruelty. I didn't choose this, detective, but I can choose what I do with it." Her words were calm, measured, but Claire saw the fire beneath them. She wasn't just a fugitive. She was a believer. A woman who saw herself not as a killer, but as a weapon of balance. Then why Calloway? Claire pressed. Why him? Dahlia's expression flickered. Because he thought the world was his to buy. His wife. His daughters. Every woman who crossed his path. He left scars you'll never read about in the papers. Men like him leave their damage behind like breadcrumbs, and no one ever follows them. I follow. The silence between them thickened. Claire realized Dahlia wasn't going to run. Not yet. She was testing her, probing her, just as she had done with every man who let her close. "You don't have to keep doing this," Claire said carefully. "We can get you help. Protection. Whatever Ward did to you." At the mention of Ward's name, Dahlia's eyes flashed. "You don't say his name." Her voice was suddenly sharp, dangerous. "He made me what I am. And every man who thinks he can own a woman, they all carry his face." Claire took a step forward, hand brushing the grip of her pistol. "Then let me take you in before you add another face to your list." For the first time, Dahlia laughed. It was low, haunting, but almost sad. "You think you can cage me? You think you can save me?" "Detective, I am the cage." Before Claire could respond, Dahlia moved. Not to attack. She didn't need to. She slipped into the shadows between the motel buildings with a speed and silence that stunned Claire. By the time Claire rounded the corner, Dahlia was gone. Only the lingering trace of perfume and the echo of her laughter remained. Back at her car, Claire slammed her hands against the steering wheel in frustration. She had seen her, spoken to her. For one fleeting moment, she had Dahlia within reach. And yet, she had nothing to show for it but the confirmation that Dahlia wasn't finished. As the night stretched on, Claire replayed every word, every look. Dahlia wasn't killing for thrill. She was killing with purpose, and that made her far more dangerous. Somewhere out there, Dahlia was already choosing her next target, and Claire knew one thing for certain. The next time they met, it wouldn't be a conversation. It would be a reckoning. By the time Richard Calloway's body gave out, the entire nation was watching. News anchors used words like mystery illness and flesh-eating toxin, but none of them could hide the horror in their voices. Clips of Richard being wheeled into the ER, bandages soaked crimson, had gone viral within hours. The tabloids branded him the melting millionaire. His business rivals whispered that karma had finally come for him. His wife, Evelyn, refused to leave the hospital, sitting stone-faced outside the isolation ward as if sheer willpower could keep her husband from slipping away. But willpower couldn't stop the rot. Doctors tried everything: experimental antivirals, skin grafts, even a desperate attempt at induced hypothermia to slow the breakdown. Nothing worked. His flesh dissolved faster than they could replace it. Machines kept his lungs working, but his body was unraveling in real time. By the end of the week, Richard was no longer recognizable as the polished, arrogant man who strutted through hotel lobbies. He was a husk, wrapped in gauze, whispering a single name whenever consciousness allowed: Dahlia. Detective Claire Calloway stood by, torn between duty and pity. She had devoted her life to catching killers, but Dahlia didn't fit the mold. She wasn't a hitman or a sadist. She was a storm-made flesh, an experiment that should never have been. Claire knew if she caught her, the trial would turn into a circus, half the country branding her a monster, the other half hailing her as some twisted avenger of women wronged by powerful men. One night, near dawn, Richard's monitors began to flatline. Claire watched through the glass as doctors surged into the room, desperate to pull him back. For a moment, she thought they had succeeded. The rhythm ticked back on a screen. But then Richard opened his eyes. Bloodshot, glazed. He looked past the doctors, past the glass, directly at Claire. His lips moved, cracked and bleeding. She chose me. Those were his last words before the line went flat for good. The Calloway empire collapsed overnight. Investors pulled out, lawsuits piled up, and Evelyn vanished from the public eye with their daughters. But Richard's death was just one chapter in Dahlia's story. Within weeks, whispers of her resurfaced, first in Houston, then in Atlanta, later in a high-rise in Manhattan. Always the same pattern: a wealthy man, a night of passion, a morning of screams. Claire pursued every lead, but Dahlia was always one step ahead. The woman in red never stayed long, never left a digital trace. And yet, she left just enough breadcrumbs to make Claire believe Dahlia wanted her to follow. Their brief encounter outside the motel haunted her. The way Dahlia had laughed, the way her eyes carried both fury and sorrow. Claire knew she wasn't chasing a killer in the traditional sense. She was chasing someone who believed she had been born into her role, someone who thought herself judge, jury, and executioner. One evening, months later, Claire received a flash drive in an unmarked envelope. No fingerprints, no return address. On it was a single video file. The footage showed a candlelit room, Dahlia seated in front of the camera in that same crimson dress. She didn't smile. She didn't seduce. Her expression was solemn, her voice calm but charged with steel. "They call me a monster," she said, "but they never ask why. I didn't choose this. Men chose it for me. Men like Ward, men like Calloway. Men who believe women's bodies are experiments or property. I am not your monster. I am the reflection of your sins. And as long as those sins exist, so will I. The video ended abruptly, leaving Claire staring at her own reflection in the black screen. That night, Claire wrote in her case notes, "Dahlia is not finished. She will never be finished. She is both the crime and the consequence." In the years that followed, Dahlia became less a person than a legend. Men in high circles whispered her name like a curse. Some swore they saw her at bars, at galas, in the corner of dimly lit rooms. Others claimed she was dead, that Claire had buried the truth. But the bodies never stopped appearing. And sometimes, late at night, Claire would catch the faintest trace of perfume in a crowd, pomegranate and smoke, and she knew Dahlia was still out there, still watching, still choosing. The last confirmed sighting came from a grainy security camera at a hotel in Rio de Janeiro. A woman in a scarlet dress, walking hand in hand with a senator known for scandals hushed up with bribes. The next morning, he was gone, and she was nowhere to be found. For Claire, the case remained open. For the world, Dahlia became a myth. But for the men who thought themselves untouchable, she was something far more terrifying. A reminder that sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or cops. It comes in the shape of a woman you never should have touched. And somewhere, in another city, another man was about to learn what Richard Calloway had discovered too late. A night with Dahlia was never just a night. It was a sentence,